I welcome to today's Center for Global Health lecture. We're pleased to have today Dr. Michael Matergia, who is a fellow in the Center for Global Health and also a faculty member in family medicine at St. Joseph Hospital. He'll be speaking with us today about his ongoing efforts in Darjeeling. Get this mic on. How are you guys doing today?
Nice. All right. So that's kind of loud. You guys need the mic? Me well without it? Okay. I'm going to take that off. All right, so we're going to talk today. The title of this talk is 10 Years in Darjeeling, Creating a Partnership for Community Engagement and Impact in the Eastern Himalayas. Basically, what I want to do is kind of use my own personal story and what I've been doing for about the past decade since I graduated college is kind of an example of one way towards a career with...
use the mic.
I do? Okay.
No, you could use this guy, but yeah, you got to use a mic.
Okay. All right. All right, so using my own personal story as kind of an example of how you can have a potential career in global health or incorporate global health into a career in medicine. We're going to talk about what we've done to develop an international partnership for community-based development in this region. We'll also talk specifically about a school health program and how that has achieved impact. And then we'll go through some challenges and key lessons that I've learned. And I also want to lastly kind of introduce you to the Darjeeling Himalayas, the people in the region. So to start off, I'm not sure if you guys know where Darjeeling is. I didn't until I arrived there, but it's in India, in the state of West Bengal, which is right here. And it's this little tiny landmass that's sandwiched between Nepal, Bhutan, and Bangladesh. So a very, very interesting area to work. Geographically, it falls in the eastern Himalayan belt. So this is what Darjeeling looks like. Very dramatic, lush, green rolling hills that basically cascade up to Kanchenjunga, which is the third highest peak in the world. As you can imagine, though, this geography it tends to put some stresses on the communities in the area. So most of the communities that we work with are quite remote, quite rural. The economy in Darjeeling is based on basically three different things. Tourism, because it's beautiful and people like to go there, and it's a lot cooler than the rest of India. Tea. So if you guys are tea drinkers, you probably have had Darjeeling tea at one point, and that really is probably 80% of the economy. And then there are small subsistence kind of agricultural belts in between. So tea plantations, so Darjeeling is definitely a global brand. It's one of three products that has geographic designation. So champagne, cognac, and Darjeeling tea. So everywhere, this is a new thing there. Everywhere you go, there's these billboards up that say, like, Darjeeling, the champagne of tea. They're very, very proud of it. That means that most of our communities that we work are laborers on tea estates or families of laborers on tea estates. Tea estates or tea gardens is kind of the generous word for what you would call this. The most accurate would be tea plantations. These are plantation-based labor systems where the workers live in plantation housing. They work the plantation land, and they're basically, the plantations are obligated to provide them a series of social services. Current labor or wage rates are about 90 cents a day on days that you're working. I get a lot of questions about, like, what language, or those people don't look quite Indian, and they're not. So, well, they are and they're not. So they're not traditional Indians. They're Indian Nepali, kind of the same way that I'm Italian American. They are second or third generation Nepalis that were brought over by the British Raj to work the tea estates. So they're an ethnic minority within India. Because of that, there's a lot of political and social upheaval in the region, and there's kind of an ongoing movement for a separate state called Gorkhaland for just the Nepali people of the Darjeeling region. So how did I get there? About 10 years ago, we were graduating college. I was a Southeast Asian history major. That's where I wanted to go. And I was kind of talking to my wife. We were going to go do some teaching in Vietnam or Cambodia. And she got this bright idea that we should go to India. I said, hell no, the food's too spicy. I don't want to go there. I'll starve. Like most things, she won that argument, so somehow we ended up in Darjeeling. We were going to work with an NGO, a health and education NGO that existed there, and we were going to help volunteer and do some health and education work. So we naively boarded a plane, flew over there, got in a car with someone that we thought was from the NGO. The NGO was really just her. She was just a rich socialite that lived about 4 hours away, and we were dropped off on one of the tea plantations and kind of said, good luck, have fun for the next 3 weeks. So we looked around and said, okay, what are we going to do? Looked down the hill and saw this school. So this is Holder Coatee Primary School, and all the kids were waving and screaming. So we decided we'd ramble on down there. And we said, hey, we're here, we can help. Do you guys need any help? And the headmistress was like, absolutely, come on in. Plopped us in front of, this is about half of the nursery, kindergarten, and first grade class, and said, go ahead, teach them. So we stood there. None of these kids speak any English. They barely knew their Nepali alphabet. We tried every nursery song that we knew, Wheels on the Bus, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, and then ran out of ideas and gave them paper and pens to color. Their teacher was hired and paid, showed up once a month for her paycheck, and otherwise was not in the school. So we became the de facto teachers for that classroom, and we were there for an entire academic year. This is my wife, Denna, and this is what our classroom looked like on a good day. So there was 30 kids aged 3 to 6, a chaotic and rambunctious bunch, but I think we had a lot of success. It was a ton of fun. And by the end, we even had a few kids that were reading for the first time and reading in English, which was not their native language. The entire time we were living there, we were living in a village called Holder Coatee. And I think this is this is an important step for our professional development, because it was the time investment that we needed to build a commitment and a connection to an area. So we were there for about 13 months, and for 13 months, people there treated us like their family. We were invited in their homes. We shared meals with them. We ate dinner with them every day. We joined them in their celebrations. We joined them in their time of mourning, and we joined them for about 3,000 cups of tea. And I think it's that connection. It's that this is who we refer to as our Holder Coatee family, and they really are family to us, and it's that connection and that drives us kind of to continue this work. And when things kind of get tough and you're just like, I'm just going to give up. But it was a fantastic experience, but not without its challenges. So the village that we lived in, most of the people worked on a tea estate or tea plantation called Makabari. The village, however, was founded prior to the tea estate coming into existence. They owned the land, and they had owned the land for about 5 generations. This is one of the tea garden owners, Raja Banerjee. So one day we're up drinking tea, as you do, and he comes riding up on his horse in his safari suit, and he looks around, doesn't get off his horse, and he says, okay, in 2 months, I'm going to build a hotel on this village, so you're going to move. Right, so looked at him and they said no, and that started a quite contentious land fight. Went to court. He showed up with a deed to the property that was signed by his great-grandfather, and it was about as white as the paper that you guys are looking at 100 years later. So the judge said, well, that's not real. So he goes back, he dips it in tea, he lets it dry, burns the edges, takes the same thing back the next day. And the judge is like, oh, okay, you do own the land. So there was, again, ongoing battle. We kind of got embroiled in it. Long story short, they ended up being able to keep the land. And long story short, we had to leave in the middle of the night due to kind of safety fears for Dana and I. So that was the first time we were in Darjeeling. Going back to our classroom and how we got involved in school health work. So about 50% of these kids have intestinal parasites. 40% are iron deficient anemic. They miss about 20 plus days of school a year from diarrhea or other waterborne illnesses. A lot of them have undiagnosed chronic or developmental challenges. So this is Yantin. He is one of 10 to 20% of children with a diagnosable mental health condition, most likely ADHD. And the response here would be positive behavior reinforcement, and the response there was every time he acted out to give him a good whack with the bamboo stick. This is Anand in the back of the class. He's the oldest kid in this classroom. And he's standing on the same bench that they all are. So he has some serious developmental challenges. I think what was most illuminating is, so I was doing some digitization of the health records there, and I came across Anand's brother and Chedup's younger sister, who were not in our class but should have been. They had died of diarrhea and pneumonia, respectively. The response to this in India, to taking care of these kids, primarily is through school health. So there's a large international consensus around the concept of comprehensive school health. UNESCO, WHO have frameworks. The National Rural Health Mission in India defines it as a public health priority program, and it's the only public health program that touches the lives of children aged 4 to 10. The problem is it exists at a policy level, it exists at a budgetary level, but when you get down to the community level, it's a implementation challenge throughout India, and particularly in remote rural environments like the Eastern Himalayas, like Darjeeling. One of the big challenges, one of the core issues to why it's a challenge to put this in place is because there's a shortage. It's a human resource challenge. It's a human resource crisis. There aren't enough teachers to begin with, right? We were there teaching because the teacher that was there did not show up. The ones that do show up have more than they can handle in a given day. The other way of doing school health is through doctors. Well, in West Bengal, they asked the block medical officer. Even if they wanted to travel out to schools in addition to all their other responsibilities, it's just not possible. It's not feasible. So there is an active movement to look for ways to do this and alternative models. What we kind of conceptualized, and I guess would define as our key innovation, is using a lay field worker-led model or a community health worker-driven model. So task shifting to a human resource that already exists in the community. Right, we turn these delivery agents school health activists, and we believe with training and support that they can deliver comprehensive school health in about 3 to 4 rural primary schools. So we took that idea, packaged that with all the components of what comprehensive school health is, so health education, primary health services, and a healthy school environment, and packaged that into a program that we call CHIP, Comprehensive Health and Hygiene Improvement Program. If you guys work in development at all, you know everything has to have a catchy acronym, and so that is ours. And I think it's been a branding success. I'll talk a little bit about primary health services. So what does that mean? Some of that is direct service delivery. So deworming, albendazole twice a year. Iron deficiency anemia, supplement with iron on a weekly schedule, 12 weeks on, 12 weeks off. A lot of that, though, is screening children, identifying the ones that need to be brought into the public health system, and then providing that empathetic social support to connect the health system that exists to the rural communities and kids that aren't accessing it. So we do a variety of screenings, growth monitoring, epilepsy, vision. We do an adapted form of the well child check that some of your kids may go through here. Healthy school environment just briefly means both infrastructure, water and toilets, and also psychosocial health environment. So positive behavior reinforcement, anti-bullying or anti-corporal punishment measures. So basically we developed this after I had left in 2008. I came back to medical school. My wife got her master's in education because she liked teaching so much. I was at Harvard and I was absolutely miserable. So we decided, let's go back to Darjeeling and see if this idea actually works. So in 2011, we returned. I think there are 3 things that were key to making that happen, to being able to kind of make the leap from being a medical student in Boston to having something up and running in India. The first would be partnerships. So we had developed partnerships with a local organization called Darjeeling Prerna and an international aid organization called Mercy Corps that were active in the region with some funding from Starbucks and Tazo Tea. That provided the institutional support that we needed to kind of hop on board. Funding was an issue, obviously. So Harvard University, I got a traveling fellowship. It basically was $25,000 that you were supposed to go use to study at London School of Economics or something like that. But they let me take it to go to India. We lived on about $3,000 of that thousand, and that was our seed funding for getting CHIP up and running. The other thing that I think was very important was mentorship and networking. And I was part of a fellowship through the American India Foundation. So I think those were kind of three key things. The first year, these are our four school health activists that we hired: Nima, Dheeraj, Satyam, and Miriam. They worked in 7 schools that year, touching the lives of about 350 students. And they're still our 4 school health activists, and I can't say enough positive about them. So when we were based in Darjeeling town, and we told people what our idea is, even there, the constant refrain was, it's not possible. You're not going to be able to use villagers. They're too lazy. They're too dumb. They're not going to show up, yada, yada, yada. I can tell you that they are extremely, extremely talented, extremely, extremely dedicated, and have been able to exceed every expectation that I may have had for them. And I think they're special, and they definitely have a special place in my heart, but I don't think they're unique. I think there are people like this in every community, in every village in the Darjeeling Himalayas. So 5 years we've been up and running with this program. Over the past 5 years, 16 schools and about 2,000 kids have moved through it. And I guess the question is, does it work, right? What we had was an idea, an innovation, a model, and what we needed to do was test it. So we're pretty, for an organization with not a lot of money, we try to be very data-driven and very heavy into assessing our impact. This is a lot what I'm doing here as a fellow this year at the Global Health Center, is basically trying to figure out, we've amassed all this data, how do you analyze it, what do we need to look at, and that's been a lot of fun. We're looking at it in a step-wedged framework. We have a set of control schools and our set of intervention schools. Quasi-experimental in the sense that this is, this represents ground reality. This is not a randomized control experiment. You can see some schools, they drop out because they shut down. Some schools, they come online because Satyam, the SHA, decides not only does he want to be an SHA, he wants to run a school as well, and so he started one. We analyze this within a feasibility, acceptability, and impact framework. Feasibility would be to answer that question that everyone had in Darjeeling, like, well, are you going to be able to do this? Are you going to be able to take villagers and use them to deliver comprehensive school health? I think we can say pretty confidently the answer is yes. So when it comes to them as teachers, they've all been rated as proficient or excellent. They provide 95% or higher coverage rates on all the individual components of our health intervention. And when it comes to access to care, they've moved 350 kids through the system. Impact, a few of the variables that we've looked at. Caveat on this is kind of the early non-adjusted analysis. And so we're not done plowing through it, but these are the numbers that we've generated so far. And I think the one that I'd like to hone in on is the 30% decrease in diarrhea. That's a relative decrease in diarrheal incidence. And we look at that as a downstream endpoint for multiple things that we do, right? So health education, if you teach a kid to wash their hands, or you teach them to go into their home and take a poster that they've created and teach their parents about boiling water. If you put a water system into their school, if you deworm them and increase their nutritional status, all that should add up to kind of downstream health impacts. Diarrhea is the major kind of public health morbidity threat to these kids, and we've, again, seen a 30% decrease. That's largely driven, I think, by about a 44% increase in knowledge. And then again, we look at the school health index as a measure of the school environment that we're impacting. An adapted WHO psychosocial assessment. Some of the things that build into that are community perceptions that bullying and corporal punishment has decreased about 10 to 15% in the schools that we've worked in. So it's been fun. I think it's been successful, but it hasn't been easy. And these are some of the things that I've learned by kind of basically trying to start something from scratch. First challenge was funding, right? So we had and I'm going to go kind of through a series of existential crises. And I mean that not in the sense of for my own self, but in the sense of our organization as to like, are we going to exist in about 2 months? So we had our first board meeting, right? And we're up and running. We're working with our partners. Everything's going well. And then we look at each other and like, well, how is this going to work next year? We have no money. So this is what we did.
In 2012, Broadleaf had its first annual Kathmandu to Darjeeling charity ride. A group of 7 riders traveled more than 250 miles, experiencing the amazing landscape and culture of the eastern Himalayas. Terrain consisted of extreme mountain climbs, descents, dirt paths, and highways under construction. Along the way, the riders interacted with the people living in the remote regions of Nepal and the Darjeeling district. They were welcomed into homes to share tea, meals, and life stories with the local people. The riders also observed a widespread lack of functioning healthcare, schools, roads, and access to water. The ride was a true adventure, but one that made clear the needs of the people living in this region. Broadleaf hopes to make this annual charity ride a way for supporters to directly experience life in the eastern Himalayas, while supporting the development of schools, medical care, and access to water in the future.
So I think that gives a little bit of a visual of what I'm talking about, and also that's what we did. That was our first $20,000 for the second year. Ton of fun. We rode about 300 miles. One person flipped off a bike going about 35 miles an hour, about a half a day from healthcare. So it was a pretty sweet and wild ride. And that's what we've had to do. You know, every year it's the challenge of how are you going to get the funds to do this the next year. Did you have a question? Volunteers. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So basically, these are this group that went the first year was a few of our initial board members, friends of ours, and a few other people that just happened to join us. And they basically did it like, you know, how Team and Challenge or a lot of people do marathons here and say like, hey, give me $10 for every mile or give me $100. I'm going to go ride a bike from Kathmandu across Nepal to Darjeeling. It was fun. I mean, the other big challenge was at the time there wasn't a map of Nepal that accurately reflected the road system. So there was either maps that looked like it had 5 years ago, or there was maps that made it look like it should. Like Google Maps projected what the road should look like in about 5 years. So we would just be riding down the road, and we rode on a highway that was under construction, and then you'd get to where they were going to tunnel, and the tunnel wasn't built, and then you'd have to like ride the like dirt path along the cliffs to get over to the other side, or you'd be like, is there a bridge up there? Yeah, there's a bridge in 5 kilometers. You ride 5 more, and then is there a bridge up there? Yeah, 5 more kilometers, and you do that for about 80 kilometers, and then you get there and there'd be no bridge, and then you'd have to turn around and go somewhere else. So, I mean, and I say this because this is what you have to do. I mean, this is what we've had to do is just get very, very creative in looking for every single funding source that we can to try to grow our work. So we do the bike ride. We do Gallon, Dena and Maya's hometown. We've gotten small grants from different foundations. We've got a corporate sponsorship with a NASCAR track in Pennsylvania. We have a corporate sponsorship with a startup online tea business in India. We have a relationship with an outsourcing firm there called Infosys, which is kind of the Google of India. And we, every year, try to cobble that together and keep running our programs and expand our impact. The good thing, I think there's a lot of benefit, and no one handed us $1 million and said, go do this. There's an incredible amount of waste in international development. And when you don't have the funding, but you have the motivation to make impact with it, it forces you to maximize the impact of every single dollar that you have, right? And so I think by default, we've had to build a very lean and efficient organization. And I think that sets us up very well for if and when someone ever does drop that nice bag of gold in our laps. But I think it really, that is one, I would not go back and change that. I think having limited funds is what makes us a strong organization and set up for success in the future. The other challenge is legality and bureaucracy. This is the picture that comes up when you Google Indian bureaucracy, and this is what most government offices in India do look like. So, I mean, some of it's on the U.S. side, right? We had to set up a 501(c), get nonprofit status, get incorporated in Pennsylvania, set up our accounting. That was one thing. Then the other thing was trying to figure out how all that works in India. And so we set up a trust there. And then the real tricky part is there's something called the FCRA, the Foreign Currency Registration Act in India. And it deals with how money comes from out of the country and moves into the country. And it is an incredible barrier to trying to do this stuff. So we've been working for about 3 years pretty hard to get that approval. And I think we're pretty close, but in the meantime, we've had to work with other organizations that have registration under that act. And that's what led to our existential crisis number 2. This slide is blank because it's going online, and this is not something that I would want publicly shared. We worked through, initially, our money initially went to Mercy Corps. Mercy Corps is a large U.S.-based nonprofit, kind of like Care for the Children size, about $500 million a year. They passed that money to our local partners in India called Darjeeling. Everything was going good till the government in India changed, and they, for a variety of reasons, have decided to look at the NGO or the civil society sector a little bit more carefully. Mercy Corps works up in Jammu and Kashmir, which is a very sensitive region, and so they fell on the blacklist. So they were no longer allowed to move money. At the same time, we were prepared to break our relationships with our local partner and move entirely into working from broadleaf to broadleaf India. We had another organization called American India Foundation that was going to take our money and move it over. At the same time, they basically said, no, we can't do this. Right? So we were in a position where we had no way to get our funds to India. It was about 2 months of funding that we had, and that was something that had to be negotiated at multiple 4 and 3 a.m. phone calls. And eventually things changed, and we strengthened our partnership with our current partner called Darjeeling. The last kind of lesson or challenges is around partnership, but also personnel. So I think one of the things that I've taken away from this is your idea can be great, you can be brilliant. I don't think I am that, but it doesn't matter. Your idea is 2% of it. The success of your organization is driven by the talent that you can pull into it. And I think particularly for an organization that is focused on community development and community empowerment, we have had to search for and identify young talent in Darjeeling, bring them on board, and then grow their skills. That's hard to do in a region where anyone with talent promptly migrates out to Delhi, Mumbai, or the Middle East where they can make a ton more money. We were lucky enough to find a few key people. This is Priscilla. If we disappeared tomorrow, this would be our best legacy in Darjeeling. Priscilla came after she got her master's in social work to us. She was kind of planning on spending about a year with her parents before she went to work with an organization in Delhi. we grabbed a hold of her. She worked with us. She kind of fell in love with the work. We are doing a lot of child mental health project development at the moment. She has a particular passion and interest in that. We've trained and got her certified in child mental health, and I think, she's going to be working with us for the next 20 or 30 years, hopefully. When you can't find the talent in the area where you are, you have to fill it, and we've kind of creatively looked for different solutions. One is the American India Foundation's Clinton Fellowship. So I don't know if there are any grad students here, but they basically look for young professionals, largely from America, and then pair them with NGOs for a year in India. And we've had 7 fellows with us. The last one, I guess this falls under personnel, is a lot of people are like, I want to start an organization. How do you do it? And the first thing I say is don't. If there is someone already existing that does what you want to do, tap into them. We had no one there that had aspirations for what we wanted to do, and that's why we decided to start our own organization. But I'm a doctor. I'm not a manager. I'm not an accountant. I'm not an executive. I'm not human resources. I'm not a legal professional, but I've had to wear that hat for our organization in some capacity or the other, right? Going back to some of those bureaucratic challenges, I could probably pass the bar exam in India with the amount of research I've done into Indian laws. So if you're going to start something, you got to be prepared to do that. You got to be prepared to accept challenges that are outside of your domain of expertise. So that's 10 years. We've gone from not knowing what Darjeeling is or where in the world it was to being teachers in a classroom there, to having an idea for how to deliver school health, to demonstrating that idea is powerful and works, and having a platform to grow and achieve what we want to do in the next 10 years. What we want to do. So CHIP, our school health program, we view this as kind of an inflection point for us, right? We've piloted, we have the data, we can say that it works. And if we believe that, we're kind of morally compelled to push this out to as many children as possible and scale it. And we want to. When the goal that we've written down as an organization is 1 million children by 2027. And so we're looking at how to achieve that. There are 2 paths to scale that we see. Public sector through the government, private sector through low-cost private schools that exist there, and we're exploring options both ways. I told you about Yuntin and Anand, 2 kids with behavioral or developmental or mental health challenges. We've developed an approach to supporting those kids, and we're looking to take that approach and run basically a trial. We're in the early stages of looking at how do you deliver primary care to some of those laborers on tea plantations. All that, we hope, occurs within the context of a world-class for-impact organization based in Darjeeling. And my personal goal is just to continue serving patients here and there. So questions, discussions, what do you guys want to know? Yeah. So one of the things that we are actively trying to do is, so our two core staff members there and future leaders, Priscilla and Sanjita, we want to get them into an Ashoka-like social entrepreneurship or incubator program. We've looked at Ashoka. They are basically in stage 2 of 3 of an application towards something called the Unlimited Fellowship, which is a similar early stage social entrepreneur incubator program. And that's something that we're hoping we can get into and help build their capacity. I think it's more important that they get that training than I or my wife here get that training. So that's what we're kind of aiming for. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think so Ashoka specifically is something that we have explored, and we kind of ended up prioritizing this unlimited for the application initially, for a few different reasons. And mostly, I mean, the biggest is geographic qualification. So Ashoka, the conversations that we had with them was largely the Northeast is out of their geographic scope. But I think it's that idea and that concept is certainly something that our team there needs. Yeah. Yeah. Culturally appropriate. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about the child mental health, right? So the basis of this is, what people call the treatment gap, right? So that 10 to 20% of children have a diagnosable mental health condition. That's stable across the world. That epidemiology goes from culture to culture. In the U.S., the treatment gap is about 80%. So 20% of those kids are recognized and supported. In global settings, it's about 90%. And where we work, I'd say it's 100%, right? So the question is, how do you reach those children? We work in an area with there's about 800,000 people, and 80,000 of those are school-age children, give or take. There's one psychiatrist. There are no psychologists. There are 2 therapists, one of whom is Priscilla. And so the question is, again, it's a human resource question, right? How are you going to leap over that treatment gap if you do not have the professionals to do it, and you are not for the next, foreseeable future? So what we looked at is within the context of our school health program, we do have a resource, right? We have the school health activists. And so how can we leverage them to support these children was kind of the initial question. I'm working on this project with one of my colleagues from med school who's a child and adolescent psychiatrist. And basically, in fits and starts, we've been kind of iteratively working on this for quite a while, but we've developed a program and have been field testing it for the past year, the goal of which is to take applied behavioral analysis, level that for what a teacher or health worker there can do, train them to recognize behaviors, causes of behaviors, antecedents of behaviors, and the reasons behind the behaviors, and then also train them in basically a modified version of CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy, and then put them in place and see what happens, right? And so we've been doing that for about a year with our 4 school health activists. They each chose a student, and they've been working individually to see how it's gone. And like I said, we've been working on this iteratively because we've fallen on our face at least 2 or 3 times with this, right? And I think we finally are at something where we're confident that we have something that works. And, for example, there is a child named Ugan. He works with Dheeraj. This is not Ugan, but this is Dheeraj. Ugan was recognized on the basis of withdrawn. He sat in the back of the class. He didn't interact during the health education lessons. During lunch, he kind of just sat by himself underneath the tree. And that's what Dheeraj kind of recognized and decided to work with him around. And, a lot of this, I use applied behavioral and cognitive behavior therapy, and those are just big words for getting adult with some empowerment and motivation to support and love a child, right? So Dheeraj has gone into the home with Ugan. He's found out that Ugan's mom had died, his dad's away working, and he's basically being raised by his older brothers, and he's coming to school without lunch, which is why he sits off by himself underneath the tree. He was struggling academically, he was struggling socially. So Dheeraj has done a lot, put together a plan, positive behavior reinforcement, sit in the front of the class, engage him in his academic work, help him, different activities to help him build friendships and social networks with his peers. And the result after 4 or 5 months is basically this kid is thriving, right? His grades are up. His behavior is better. Teachers are like, how did you fix him? How is he not a problem anymore? He is front of the class, first kid to grab his pen and start filling out the worksheets the minute they come around. They make sure he gets lunch every day, which he plows through because he needs to get out on the field and play with his friends. And so I think it's a lot. That's what it is, right? It's just empowering someone that's already there and giving them some technical tools to do what they're able to do. And then as far as the cultural appropriateness of that, right, they make sure that's adapted for their community, right? You give them the raw skill and the talent, or the raw skill and the frameworks and the knowledge, and then they make sure it lines up with their community expectations. Well Child is based on the Bright Futures frameworks, and it's basically split into one, a health screen that's in rough sense a review of systems, and they go through kind of the checklists, and then we bring those into a pediatrician, kind of sit down and decide which kids actually need to be brought into the health system. And the other is based on the kind of preventative guidance or anticipatory guidance that pediatricians and family docs here provide to patients. So they'll sit down with the family and kind of just, they have age appropriate and culturally appropriate sort of narratives, and they work with the families to identify, this is what I'm going to talk about, and then provide guidance around those. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So we have our procurement system set up for albendazole and iron, not vitamin A, but that's pretty easy to. Basically, we use the same suppliers that the government does or would use if they were putting this into place. The community question, it depends by school. So I kind of alluded there's two very different environments. One is the government schools, where about 40% of the kids are, and the other are low-cost private schools, which have kind of didn't exist 10 years ago and now capture about 60% of the market, right? And that is the communities where these schools don't look like. This is, I have a picture here. This is a private school, right? So there, you can see there's slats and boards that are missing. There's holes in this roof. They basically have to shut down 50% of their classroom during monsoon because they flood. Government schools are concrete, beautiful structures. Kids get their uniforms, their meals paid for, their textbooks paid for, but the teachers don't show up, right? And if they do, they're not actively engaged with learning. That's why we ended up teaching for a year, right? That would have never happened if the teacher was there every day. We probably would have been in Darjeeling 3 weeks and moved on with our life as originally planned. But the communities, they look and they see India's a real fascinating place to work because there's this enormous growth in the economy. And so you have all these parents that are third, fourth generation. My great-grandmother plucked tea. My grandmother plucked tea. I plucked tea. I don't want my kid to pluck tea. And now there's a different future for them if they can get educated and go to Mumbai, go to Delhi. We in 10 years have seen that happen. Friends of ours have kind of made the leap from a one-bedroom house to their kids being middle class and working in Bangalore. So they create these private schools as a response to that, as a way to get their kids educated. And so these schools, the private schools, all have parent committees that we engage with and work with. The government schools have, to some degree or another, maybe something that looks like that. And so we work whatever is in place, we work with. We kind of will ask them around health policies and then help them develop policies within their buildings. Our SHAs are, for the past 2 years, as a response to kind of more engaging the parents, have been doing once quarterly or once monthly, depending on the area, parent meetings, where they basically just do the same kind of lessons that they're teaching the kids for the parents. And it's been going really well. We'll get quite a good response. Yeah. I guess it could be if we had more money and wanted to get more done. we could choose to bribe. I think we've morally and ethically had this conversation and said we're not going to. And so it's not been something that we have ever interacted with. I would say that, I talked about getting that FCRA registration. I mean, we've been told that cost is about $5,000. And there have been other organizations that have decided to take $5,000 and, pay the bakshish and move on and have that stamp. And maybe that's the right thing to do. I don't know. It certainly would make our life easier. It would have, negated existential crisis number 2 if we had that certification already. But it's for us a line in the sand that we've drawn. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 I will say, okay, I guess we're being recorded, but I'll fess up to the one time I did decide that I was going to try to make my life easier was that first year. We had a 6-month visa because, like I said, we were going to be there 3 weeks. We ended up staying there a year. The only way to get one at the time was to leave the country and go to either Kathmandu or Bangkok or some other country and reapply. And we were like, no, it's school's actively in session. We don't want to leave. We're engaged with teaching. So we traveled down to Kolkata. We met some guy that I guess looked like he was part of the local mafia. We strode into the visa office. I thought it was all cool and exciting. As a 22-year-old, we were going to bribe him. And we did the same thing. We tried to put the money on the desk, and it just got slid back to us. And the next day, we were off to Kathmandu to get our visa. So I don't know, maybe that's not the good area. That's not the right area to attempt to bribe. So Darjeeling, I guess that geographically is analogous to maybe here in that there's, Darjeeling might be Summit County up in the mountains, and then there's a city called Siliguri that's right on the plains. That's probably kind of Denver-esque. There is a school there called the North Bengal University, and there's North Bengal Medical College that is part of that. There's definitely a bit of a culturally contentious relationship with that in the sense that it's on the plains. It serves primarily Bengali students versus rather than the Nepalis who want their own state. And one of the demands around statehood is for an academic hospital and institution there. But for right now, it is what exists. We have not done a whole lot of direct partnership with them, but it's certainly there and available. Not one of India's shining lights of an institution, though. It's not CMC Vellore or, one of the IMCs or Tata University or something like that. Yeah. 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 Maybe it is a path that we should kind of consider a little bit more. Yeah. Not there. Yeah. No, I think there's a lot to that. Yeah. 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 I think there's probably, I think one of the things I guess I've learned over the fellowship period this year is seeing the resources that an academic institution can offer here And maybe that's something that we need to think about there as well. There are, even if we looked outside the region, right, there are, North Bengal University is one thing, but there are world-class universities in India that, there are some that are doing a phenomenal job over there that we might be able to partner with. Yeah. There's been a lot of, challenges around, U.S. universities that have wanted to set up outposts in India, like Wharton School of Business has one. I'm not too familiar with it, but it sounds like the same sort of navigation issues. Yeah, I think that's something worth looking into. Yeah. All right. Thanks, guys.